I'll bring in Ben White, Politico's chief economic correspondent. He's also a CNBC contributor. Ben, it's good to have you here in studio. A very momentous day, a very big one in terms of the news kind of worthiness and development. I wonder, Eamon's reporting right now about what's happening here. What exactly can we expect? How long should it take? We've heard a lot of legal experts speculate about how long this could be, but the unsealing of the indictment is what many people are curious about right now.
That is the critical piece of information, as Eamon pointed out. We don't know. We think they are falsification of business records, everything related to the Stormy Daniels payment and Michael Cohen making that payment. So that's in that ballpark. We don't know exactly what they are, how many charges there are, and the sentences that could be attached to them. So that's the big piece of information in the case itself. The politics of it are obviously much broader than that. And the big question now to me is, does he address the cameras when he comes out? Does he make a rally cry out of it? Does he try to gin up supporters further? Knowing him and how he operates, I would think he would want to speak. Maybe he won't. Maybe he'll wait till he gets back to Trump Tower where he's more comfortable. But I would be surprised if we didn't hear publicly from former President Trump today.
We've also heard some rumblings about his return back, not just to Trump Tower, but also back down to Florida as well. Take us through the dynamic there. There are two very distinct kind of bases of operation, if you will, for President Trump here. There is certainly his support here in the New York area, and then there is what's in Mar-a-Lago and West Palm Beach. What can we expect as he kind of makes that trip going back down to what he might consider to be more of his home turf these days?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. His comfort zone is mostly Mar-a-Lago, is Florida. Obviously, Florida being central to the election, the next election, a friendlier terrain in general for him than New York. He does have some support. New York, a very blue state, mostly Democrats in the state. So he can put himself in Trump Tower and sort of isolate himself. But to be surrounded by people who love him and adulate him, that happens at Mar-a-Lago. That's where his base is most of the time. I would expect him to head back down there as soon as he can and kind of do the next phase of this from there, which is get with his attorneys, figure out what his defense is and what the politics of it are.
Eamon Javers, I wonder if I might turn to you right now as well. This is very much about kind of the overriding sentiment and macro around perhaps future political aspirations for the former President Donald Trump. What exactly would the messaging be crafted around, and how exactly would he be trying to get that message out to his supporters over the next several months, given what's happening right now with his arraignment and possibly an October court date?
Dom, what's so striking about this moment is we're talking about the former president of the United States here, but we're also talking about a potential future president of the United States here, and arguably the front runner for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination now being arraigned and arrested in New York City. That's just not anything that we've seen before. None of our political modeling or experience is set to predict how a candidate who has been indicted will fare in a national presidential campaign. We're starting to see some glimmers of it, though, with the way some of his rivals for that 2024 campaign have sort of coalesced around the idea of supporting Trump here and criticizing the DA, criticizing law enforcement in this case, but, you know, keeping their distance from him politically. That's going to be a tricky dance for his supporters. And Donald Trump is a politician, Dom, who has figured out, both in his business life and now in his political life, how to maximize the value of attention. And Donald Trump today has the nation's attention once again. He has in the past figured out a way to turn that into dollars and a way to turn that into votes, and we'll expect to see whether he can do that today in the same way. He's facing a different set of challenges today, legal challenges that he has not faced before, but he is a very savvy national figure who has learned over the years how to maximize the value of the inexhaustible amount of attention that he's able to get. He's getting that today, and we'll see what he does with it.
Ben, we've seen a number of reports from across the news world right now about just how much money former President Donald Trump has been able to raise just since this indictment happened up until this point. It is, for now, it appears to be a war chest building machine for the former president. If you take a look at what the next steps are, this is very much about how he positions himself in the Republican Party in the coming year and a half.
Yes. Everything that Eamon just said is correct. He has absolutely rallied people to his banner based on this. I think, Dom, that he, not fading out of sight of the party, he was still the front runner, but he was less dominant in the news. He is now once again dominating the news completely. His poll numbers since this happened have gone up 41% to 44%. He is now more clearly the front runner. DeSantis numbers have gone down, and all of the other candidates have an impossible dance to do. They have to not alienate Trump's base by going after him for being indicted. They have to criticize this prosecution, but then they're in the position of potentially defending someone who is facing serious charges, a serious indictment, and perhaps conviction on felony charges. It's very difficult for them right now. Trump is where he wants to be, the center of attention. The end of it, he may not want to be if he is actually convicted on these things. But for now, it is the Trump circus, and he's benefiting from it financially and politically.
Okay, so again, we're showing viewers right now, and if you're listening on Sirius XM satellite radio, what we're showing right now are live shots in the hallway just outside the courtroom here in Manhattan, where we do expect Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, to go down at some point on his way to this particular courtroom. We'll continue to monitor and keep that shot up so that everybody can be aware of what's happening right now. We've got just a few moments left here, Eamon. I wonder, as we get ahead, kind of start on thinking about what could be in the aftermath of this particular proceeding, what exactly then would be the president's next move after this?
Well, the grim reality for the former president of the United States, Dom, is that this is not his steepest legal challenge in the weeks and months to come as we watch the courthouse here. This case might be the least threatening legally to the former president of the United States. He's got, of course, a special counsel investigation into the events surrounding January 6th, the events surrounding the election itself, the events surrounding his handling of classified information at Mar-a-Lago, and what inappropriate action he may or may not have taken in that case. All three of those scenarios could be legally more damaging to the president when those investigations ultimately materialize than this one. This one just happens to be the first to go into the criminal justice system. So it, of course, is attracting this attention today and the president's focus today, the former president's focus today.
Sure.
But this one will go for months, and then we'll see what other cases enter the criminal justice system for the former president of the United States, Donald Trump.
Ben, just a few moments left here. Last word to you here. What will you be watching?
Watching to see what Trump says when he comes out of here, what the charges are specifically, and how much evidence they have on him and how likely it is that he could be convicted of these, and then obviously what he says and what he does in the next few days to gin up his supporters.
All right. Ben White of Politico, thank you very much. Eamon Javers, I know you'll be all over this story for the duration of the day. Thank you as well.